In the beginning, when God had made the heaven and the earth as one house, the shadow which was cast by the mundane bodies involved in darkness those things which were enclosed in it. But when the will of God had introduced light, that darkness which had been caused by the shadows of bodies was straightway dispelled. Then at length light is appointed for day, darkness for the night. And now the water which was within the world in the middle space of that first heaven and earth congealed as if with frost, and solid as crystal is distended, and the middle spaces of the heaven and earth are separated as by a firmament of this sort. And that firmament the Creator called heaven, so called by the name of that previously made. And so he divided into two portions the fabric of the universe, although it was but one house. The reason of the division was this, that the upper portion might afford a dwelling place to angels, and the lower to men. After this, the place of the sea and the chaos which had been made received that portion of the water which remained below by order of the eternal will, and these flowing down to the sunk and hollow places, the dry land appeared. And the gatherings of the waters were made seas. And after this, the earth which had appeared produced various species of herbs and shrubs. It gave forth fountains also, and rivers, not only in the plains, but on the mountains. And so all things were prepared, that men who were to dwell in it might have it in their power to use all these things according to their will, that is, either for good or evil. After this, he adorns that visible heaven with stars. He places in it also the sun and the moon, that the day might enjoy the light of the one, the night that of the other, and that at the same time they might be for an indication of things past, present, and future. For they were made for signs of seasons and of days, which, although they are seen indeed by all, are understood only by the learned and intelligent. And when, after this, he had ordered living creatures to be produced from the earth and the waters, he made paradise, which also he named a place of delights. But after all these things, he made man, on whose account he had prepared all things, whose internal species is older, and for whose sake all things that are were made, given up to his service, and assigned to the uses of his habitation. All things therefore being completed which are in heaven and in earth and in the waters, and the human race also having multiplied, in the eighth generation, angels, being allured by the beauty of women, fell into promiscuous and illicit connections with these, and thenceforth, acting in all things without discretion and disorderly, they changed the state of human affairs and the divinely prescribed order of life, so that either by persuasion or force they compelled all men to sin against God, their Creator. In the ninth generation are born the giants, so called from of old, not dragon footed as the fables of the Greeks relate, but men of immense bodies, whose bones of enormous size are still shown in some places for confirmation. But against these, the righteous providence of God brought a flood upon the world, that the earth might be purified from their pollution, and every place might be turned into a sea by the destruction of the wicked. Yet there was then found one righteous man, by name Noah, who, being delivered in an ark with his 3 sons and their wives, became the colonizer of the world after the subsiding of the waters, with those animals and seeds which he had shut up with him. In the 12th generation, when God had blessed men and they began to multiply, they received a commandment that they should not taste blood, for on account of this also the deluge had been sent. In the 13th generation, when the second of Noah's three sons had done an injury to his father and had been cursed by him, he brought the condition of slavery upon his posterity. His elder brother, meantime, maintained the lot of a dwelling place in the middle region of the world, in which is the country of Judea. The younger obtained the eastern quarter, and he the western. In the 14th generation, one of the cursed progeny first erected an altar to demons for the purpose of magical arts, and offered there bloody sacrifices. In the 15th generation, for the first time, men set up an idol and worshipped it. Until that time, the Hebrew language, which had been given by God to men, bore sole sway. In the 16th generation, the sons of men migrated from the east, and coming to the lands that had been assigned to their fathers, each one marked the place of his own allotment by his own name. In the 17th generation, Nimrod the first reigned in Babylonia and built a city, and thence migrated to the Persians and taught them to worship fire. In the 18th generation, walled cities were built, armies were organized and armed, judges and laws were sanctioned, temples were built, and the princes of nations were adorned as gods. In the 19th generation, the descendants of him who had been cursed after the flood, going beyond their proper bounds, which they had obtained by lot in the western regions, drove into the eastern lands those who had obtained the middle portion of the world, and pursued them as far as Persia, while themselves violently took possession of the country from which they expelled them. In the 20th generation, a son for the first time died before his father on account of an incestuous crime. In the 21st generation, there was a certain wise man of the race of those who were expelled of the family of Noah's eldest son by name Abraham, from whom our Hebrew nation is derived. When the whole world was again overspread with errors, and when, for the hideousness of its crimes, destruction was ready for it, this time not by water, but fire, and when already the scourge was hanging over the whole earth, beginning with Sodom, this man, by reason of his friendship with God, who was well pleased with him, obtained from God that the whole world should not equally perish. From the first, this same man, being an astrologer, was able, from the account and order of the stars, to recognize the Creator, while all others were in error, and understood that all things are regulated by his providence. Whence also an angel, standing by him in a vision, instructed him more fully concerning those things which he was beginning to perceive. He showed him also what belonged to his race and posterity, and promised him that those districts should be restored rather than given to them. Therefore, Abraham, when he was desirous to learn the causes of things, and was intently pondering upon what he had been told, the true prophet appeared to him, who alone knows the hearts and purpose of men, and disclosed to him all things which he desired. He taught him the knowledge of the divinity, intimated the origin of the world, and likewise its end, showed him the immortality of the soul, and the manner of life which was pleasing to Yahweh, declared also the resurrection of the dead, the future judgment, the reward of the good, the punishment of the evil, all to be regulated by righteous judgment. And having given him all this information plainly and sufficiently, he departed again to the invisible abodes. But while Abraham was still in ignorance, as we said to you before, two sons were born to him, of whom the one was called Ishmael, and the other Eleazar. From the one are descended the barbarous nations, from the other the people of the Persians, some of whom have adopted the manner in living and institutions of their neighbors, the Brahmins. Others settled in Arabia, of whose posterity some also have spread into Egypt. From them, some of the Indians and of the Egyptians have learned to be circumcised, and to be of purer observance than others. Although in process of time, most of them have turned to impiety, what was the proof and sign of purity. Nevertheless, as he had got these two sons during the time while he still lived in ignorance of things, having received the knowledge of God, he asked of the righteous one that he might merit to have offspring by Sarah, who is his lawful wife, though she was barren. She obtained a son, whom he named Isaac, from whom came Jacob, and from him the 12 patriarchs, and from these 12, 72. These, when famine befell, came into Egypt with all their family, and in the course of 400 years, being multiplied by the blessings and promise of God, they were afflicted by the Egyptians. And when they were afflicted, the true prophet appeared to Moses and struck the Egyptians with 10 plagues, when they refused to let the Hebrew people depart from them and return to their native land. And he brought the people of Yahweh out of Egypt. But those of the Egyptians who survived the plagues, being infected with the animosity of their king, pursued after the Hebrews, and when they had overtaken them at the seashore, and thought to destroy and exterminate them all, Moses, pouring out prayer to Yahweh, divided the sea into two parts, so that the water was held on the right hand and on the left, as if it had been frozen, and the people of God passed over a dry road. But the Egyptians who were pursuing them, rashly entering, were drowned. For when the last of the Hebrews came out, the last of the Egyptians went down into the sea, and straightway the waters of the sea, which by his command were held bound as if with frost, were loosed by his command, who had bound them, and recovering their natural freedom, inflicted punishment on the wicked nation. After this, Moses, by the command of Yahweh, whose providence is over all, led out the people of the Hebrews into the wilderness, and leaving the shortest road which leads from Egypt to Judea, he led the people through long windings of the wilderness, that by the discipline of 40 years, the novelty of a changed manner of life might root out the evils which had clung to them by a long continued familiarity with the customs of the Egyptians. Meantime, they came to Mount Sinai, and thence the law was given to them with voices and sights from heaven, written in 10 precepts, of which the first and greatest was that they should worship Yahweh himself alone, and not make to themselves any appearance or form to worship. But when Moses had gone up to the mount and was staying there 40 days, the people, although they had seen Egypt struck with the 10 plagues, and the sea parted and passed over by them on foot, manna also having been given to them from heaven for bread, and drink supplied to them out of the rock that followed them, which kind of food was turned into whatever taste anyone desired, and although being placed under the torrid region of heaven, they were shaded by a cloud in the daytime, that they might not be scorched by the heat, and by night were enlightened by a pillar of fire, lest the horror of darkness should be added to the vastness of the wilderness. Those very people, I say, when Moses stayed in the mount, made and worshipped a golden calf's head, after the fashion of Apis, whom they had seen worshipped in Egypt, and after so many and so great marvels which they had seen, were unable to cleanse and wash out from themselves the defilements of old habit. On this account, leaving the short road which leads from Egypt to Judea, Moses conducted them by an immense circuit of the desert, if haply he might be able, as we mentioned before, to shake off the evils of old habit by the change of a new education. When meantime Moses, that faithful and wise steward, perceived that the vice of sacrificing to idols had been deeply ingrained into the people from their association with the Egyptians, and that the root of this evil could not be extracted from them, he allowed them indeed to sacrifice, but permitted it to be done only to Yahweh, that by any means he might cut off one half of the deeply ingrained evil, leaving the other half to be corrected by another. And at a future time by him, namely, concerning whom he said himself, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise unto you, whom ye shall hear, even as myself, according to all things which he shall say to you. Whoever shall not hear that prophet, his soul shall be cut off from his people. In addition to these things, he also appointed a place in which alone it should be lawful to them to sacrifice to Yahweh. And all this was arranged with this view, that when the fitting time should come, and they should learn by means of the prophet that God desires mercy, not sacrifice, they might see him who should teach them that the place chosen of God, in which it was suitable that victims should be offered to Yahweh in his wisdom, and that on the other hand they might hear that this place, which seemed chosen for a time, often harassed as it had been by hostile invasions and plunderings, was at last to be wholly destroyed. And in order to impress this upon them, even before the coming of the true prophet, who was to reject at once the sacrifices and the place, it was often plundered by enemies and burnt with fire, and the people carried into captivity among foreign nations, and then brought back when they betook themselves to the mercy of God, that by these things they might be taught that the people who offer sacrifices are driven away and delivered up into the hands of the enemy. But they who do mercy and righteousness are without sacrifices freed from captivity and restored to their native land. But it fell out that very few understood this. For the greater number, though they could perceive and observe these things, yet were held by the irrational opinion of the vulgar. For right opinion with liberty is the prerogative of a few. Moses, then, having arranged these things, and having set over the people one Ausus to bring them to the land of their fathers, himself by the command of the living Yahweh went up to a certain mountain, and there died. Yet such was the manner of his death, that till this day no one has found his burial place. When, therefore, the people reach their father's land by the providence of Yahweh, at their first onset, the inhabitants of the wicked races are routed, and they enter upon their paternal inheritance, which was distributed among them by lot. For some time thereafter they were ruled not by kings, but by judges, and remained in a somewhat peaceful condition. But when they sought for themselves tyrants rather than kings, then also with regal ambition they erected a temple in the place which had been appointed to them for prayer, and thus, through a succession of wicked kings, the people fell away to greater and still greater impiety. But when the time began to draw near that what was wanting in the Mosaic institutions should be supplied, as we have said, and that the prophet should appear, of whom he had foretold that he should warn them by the mercy of Yahweh to cease from sacrificing, lest haply they might suppose that on the cessation of sacrifice there was no remission of sins for them, he instituted baptism by water amongst them, in which they might be absolved from all their sins on the invocation of his name, and for the future, following a perfect life, might abide in immortality, being purified not by the blood of beasts, but by the purification of the wisdom of Yahweh. Subsequently, also, an evident proof of this great mystery is supplied in the fact that everyone who, believing in this prophet who had been foretold by Moses, is baptized in his name, shall be kept unhurt from the destruction of war which impends over the unbelieving nation and the place itself, but that those who do not believe shall be made exiles from their place and kingdom, that even against their will they may understand and obey the will of Yahweh. These things, therefore, having been forearranged, he who was expected comes, brings signs and miracles as his credentials by which he should be made manifest. But not even so did the people believe, though they had been trained during so many ages to the belief of these things. And not only did they not believe, but they added blasphemy to unbelief, saying that he was a gluttonous man and a belly slave, and that he was actuated by a demon, even he who had come for their salvation. To such an extent does wickedness prevail by the agency of evil ones, so that but for the wisdom of Yahweh assisting those who love the truth, almost all would have been involved in impious delusion. Therefore he chose us 12, the first who believed in him, whom he named apostles, and afterwards other 72 most approved disciples, that at least in this way, recognizing the pattern of Moses, the multitude might believe that this is he of whom Moses foretold, the prophet that was to come. But someone perhaps may say that it is possible for anyone to imitate a number. But what shall we say of the signs and miracles which he wrought? For Moses had wrought miracles and curses in Egypt. He also, of whom he foretold that he should rise up a prophet like unto himself, though he cured every sickness and infirmity among the people, wrought innumerable miracles, and preached eternal life, was hurried by wicked men to the cross, which deed was, however, by his power turned to good. In short, while he was suffering, all the world suffered with him. For the sun was darkened, the mountains were torn asunder, the graves were opened, the veil of the temple was rent, as in lamentation for the destruction impending over the place. And yet, though all the world was moved, they themselves are not even now moved to the consideration of so great things. But inasmuch as it was necessary that the Gentiles should be called into the room of those who remained unbelieving, so that the number might be filled up which had been shown to Abraham, the preaching of the blessed kingdom of God is sent into all the world. On this account, worldly spirits are disturbed, who always oppose those who are in quest of liberty, and who make use of the engines of error to destroy God's building, while those who press on to the glory of safety and liberty, being rendered braver by their resistance to these spirits, and by the toil of great struggles against them, attain the crown of safety, not without the palm of victory. Meantime, when he had suffered, and darkness had overwhelmed the world from the sixth even to the ninth hour, as soon as the sun shone out again, and things were returned to their usual course, even wicked men returned to themselves and their former practices, their fear having abated. For some of them, watching the place with all care, when they could not prevent his rising again, said that he was a magician. Others pretended that he was stolen away. Nevertheless, the truth everywhere prevailed, for in proof that these things were done by divine power, we who had been very few became, in the course of a few days, by the help of Yahweh, far more than they. So that the priests at one time were afraid, lest haply by the providence of Yahweh, to their confusion, the whole of the people should come over to our faith. Therefore, they often sent to us and asked us to discourse with them concerning Jesus, whether he were the prophet whom Moses foretold, who is the eternal Christ. For on this point only does there seem to be any difference between us who believe in Jesus and the unbelieving Jews. But while they often made such requests to us, and we sought for a fitting opportunity, a week of years was completed from the passion of the Lord. The church of the Lord, which was constituted in Jerusalem, was most plentifully multiplied and grew, being governed with most righteous ordinances by James, who was ordained bishop in it by the Lord. But when we 12 apostles, on the day of the Passover, had come together with an immense multitude, and entered into the church of the brethren, each one of us, at the request of James, stated briefly in the hearing of the people what we had done in every place. While this was going on, Caiaphas, the high priest, sent priests to us and asked us to come to him, that either we should prove to him that Jesus is the eternal Christ, or he to us that he is not. and that so all the people should agree upon the one faith or the other. And this he frequently entreated us to do, but we often put it off, always seeking for a more convenient time. However, when it seemed a fit opportunity and it pleased all the church, we went up to the temple. And standing on the steps together with our faithful brethren, the people kept perfect silence. And first the high priest began to exhort the people that they should hear patiently and quietly, and at the same time witness and judge of those things that were to be spoken. Then, in the next place, exalting with many praises the right or sacrifice which had been bestowed by God upon the human race for the remission of sins, he found fault with the baptism of our Jesus, as having been recently brought in opposition to the sacrifices. But Matthew, meeting his propositions, showed clearly that whosoever shall not obtain the baptism of Jesus shall not only be deprived of the kingdom of heaven, but shall not be without peril at the resurrection of the dead. Even though he be fortified by the prerogative of a good life and an upright disposition. Having made these and such like statements, Matthew stopped. But the party of Sadducees who denied the resurrection of the dead were in a rage, so that one of them cried out amongst the people, saying that those greatly err who think that the dead ever rise. In opposition to him, Andrew, my brother, answering, declared that it is not an error, but the surest matter of faith that the dead rise, in accordance with the teaching of him who Moses foretold that he should come, the true prophet. Or if, says he, you do not think that this is he whom Moses foretold, let this first be inquired into, so that when this is clearly proved to be he, there may be no further doubt concerning the things which he taught. These and many such like things Andrew proclaimed and then stopped. But a certain Samaritan, speaking against the people and against God, and asserting that neither are the dead to rise, nor is that worship of God to be maintained which is in Jerusalem, but that Mount Gerizim is to be reverenced, added also this in opposition to us, that our Jesus was not he whom Moses foretold as a prophet to come in the world. Against him and another who supported him in what he said, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, strove vigorously, and although they had command not to enter their cities, nor to bring the word of preaching to them, yet lest their discourse, unless it were confined, should hurt the faith of others, they replied so prudently and so powerfully that they put them to perpetual silence. For James made an oration concerning the resurrection of the dead, with the approbation of all the people, while John showed that if they would abandon the error of Mount Gerizim, they should consequently acknowledge that Jesus was indeed he who, according to the prophecy of Moses, was expected to come, since indeed, as Moses wrought signs and miracles, so also did Jesus. And there is no doubt that the likeness of the signs proves him to be that prophet of whom he said he should come, like himself. Having declared these things, and more to the same effect, they ceased. And behold, one of the scribes, shouting out from the midst of the people, says, the signs and miracles which your Jesus wrought, he wrought not as a prophet, but as a magician. Him Philip eagerly encounters, showing that by this argument he accused Moses also. For when Moses wrought signs and miracles in Egypt, in like manner as Jesus did also in Judea, it cannot be doubted that what was said of Jesus might as well be said of Moses. Having made these and such like protestations, Philip was silent. Then a certain Pharisee, hearing this, chid Philip because he put Jesus on a level with Moses. To whom Bartholomew, answering boldly, declared that we do not only say that Jesus was equal to Moses, but that he was greater than he, because Moses was indeed a prophet, as Jesus was also, but that Moses was not the Christ, as Jesus was, and therefore he is doubtless greater, who is both a prophet and the Christ, than he who is only a prophet. After following out this train of argument, he stopped. After him, James, the son of Alphaeus, gave an address to the people with the view of showing that we are not to believe on Jesus on the ground that the prophets foretold concerning him, but rather we are to believe the prophets that they were really prophets because the Christ bears testimony to them. For it is the presence and coming of Christ that show that they are truly prophets. For testimony must be borne by the superior to his inferiors, not by the inferiors to the superior. After these and many similar statements, James also was silent. After him, Thaddeus began vehemently to charge it upon the people that they did not believe in Jesus, who had done them so much good by teaching them the things that are of God, by comforting the afflicted, healing the sick, relieving the poor. Yet for all these benefits, their return had been hatred and death. When he had declared these and many more such things to the people, he ceased. And behold, one of the disciples of John asserted that John was the Christ, and not Jesus, inasmuch as Jesus himself declared that John was greater than all men and all prophets. If then, he said, he be greater than all, he must be held to be greater than Moses and than Jesus himself. But if he be the greatest of all, then must he be the Christ. To this, Simon the Zealot, answering, asserted that John was indeed greater than all the prophets and all who were born of women, yet that he is not greater than the Son of Man. Accordingly, Jesus is also the Christ, whereas John is only a prophet. And there is as much difference between him and Jesus as between the forerunner and him whose forerunner he is, or as between him who gives the law and him who keeps the law. Having made these and similar statements, the zealot also was silent. After him, Barnabas, who also is called Matthias, who was substituted as an apostle in the place of Judas, began to exhort the people that they should not regard Jesus with hatred, nor speak evil of him, for it were far more proper, even for one who might be in ignorance or in doubt concerning Jesus, to love than to hate him. For God has affixed a reward to love, a penalty to hatred. For the very fact, said he, that he assumed a Jewish body and was born among the Jews, how has not this incited us all to love him? When he had spoken this and more to the same effect, he stopped. Then Caiaphas attempted to impugn the doctrine of Jesus, saying that he spoke vain things, for he said that the poor are blessed, and promised earthly rewards, and placed the chief gift in an earthly inheritance, and promised that those who maintain righteousness shall be satisfied with meat and drink, and many things of this sort he is charged with teaching. Thomas, in reply, proves that his accusation is frivolous, showing that the prophets in whom Caiaphas believes taught these things much more, and did not show in what manner these things are to be, or how they are to be understood, whereas Jesus pointed out how they are to be taken. And when he had spoken these things, and others of like kind, Thomas also held his peace. Therefore, Caiaphas, again looking at me, and sometimes in the way of warning, and sometimes in that of accusation, said that I ought for the future to refrain from preaching Christ Jesus, lest I should do it to my own destruction, and lest, being deceived myself, I should also deceive others. Then, moreover, he charged me with presumption, because though I was unlearned, a fisherman, and a rustic, I dared to assume the office of a teacher. As he spoke these things and many more of like kind, I said in reply, that I incurred less danger if, as he said, this Jesus were not the Christ, because I received him as a teacher of the law, but that he was in terrible danger if he be the very Christ, as assuredly he is, for I believe in him who has appeared. But for whom else, who has never appeared, does he reserve his faith? But if I, an unlearned and uneducated man, as you say, a fisherman and a rustic, have more understanding than wise elders, this, said I, ought the more to strike terror into you. For if I disputed with any learning, and won over you wise and learned men, it would appear that I had acquired this power by long learning, and not by the grace of divine power. But now, when, as I have said, we unskilled men convince and overcome you wise men, who that has any sense does not perceive that this is not the work of human subtlety, but of divine will and gift. Thus we argued and bore witness, and we who were unlearned men and fishermen taught the priests concerning the one only God of heaven, the Sadducees concerning the resurrection of the dead, the Samaritans concerning the sacredness of Jerusalem, not that we entered into their cities, but disputed with them in public, the scribes and Pharisees concerning the kingdom of heaven, the disciples of John, that they should not suffer John to be a stumbling block to them, and all the people that Jesus is the eternal Christ. At last, however, I warned them that before we should go forth to the Gentiles to preach to them the knowledge of God the Father, they should themselves be reconciled to Yahweh, receiving his Son. For I showed them that in no way else could they be saved, unless through the grace of the Holy Spirit they hasted to be washed with the baptism of threefold invocation, and received the Eucharist of Christ the Lord, whom alone they ought to believe concerning those things which he taught, that so they might merit to attain eternal salvation, but that otherwise it was utterly impossible for them to be reconciled to God, even if they should kindle 1,000 altars and 1,000 high altars to him. For we, said I, have ascertained beyond doubt that God is much rather displeased with the sacrifices which you offer, the time of sacrifices having now passed away, and because ye will not acknowledge that the time for offering victims is now past, therefore the temple shall be destroyed, and the abomination of desolation shall stand in the holy place. And then the gospel will be preached to the Gentiles for a testimony against you, that your unbelief may be judged by their faith. For the whole world at different times suffers under diverse maladies, either spreading generally over all or affecting specially. Therefore, it needs a physician to visit it for its salvation. We therefore bear witness to you and declare to you what has been hidden from every one of you. It is for you to consider what is for your advantage. When I had thus spoken, the whole multitude of priests were in a rage, because I had foretold to them the overthrow of the temple, which when Gamaliel, a chief of the people, saw, who was secretly our brother in the faith, but by our advice remained among them, because they were greatly enraged and moved with intense fury against us, he stood up and said, be quiet for a little, O men of Israel, for ye do not perceive the trial which hangs over you. Wherefore refrain from these men, and if what they are engaged in may be of human counsel, it will soon come to an end. But if it be from God, why will you sin without cause and prevail nothing? For who can overpower the will of God? Now, therefore, since the day is declining towards evening, I shall myself dispute with these men tomorrow in this same place in your hearing, so that I may openly oppose and clearly confute every error. By this speech of his, their fury was to some extent checked, especially in the hope that the next day we should be publicly convicted of error, and so he dismissed the people peacefully. Now, when we had come to our James, while we detailed to him all that had been said and done, we supped and remained with him, spending the whole night in supplication to Almighty Yahweh, that the discourse of the approaching disputation might show the unquestionable truth of our faith. Therefore, the following day, James the bishop went up to the temple with us, and with the whole church. There we found a great multitude who had been waiting for us from the middle of the night. Therefore, we took our stand in the same place as before, in order that, standing on an elevation, we might be seen by all the people. Then, when profound silence was obtained, Gamaliel, who, as we have said, was one of our faith, but who by dispensation remained amongst them, that if at any time they should attempt anything unjust or wicked against us, he might either check them by skillfully adopted counsel, or might warn us, that we may either be on our guard, or might turn it aside. He, therefore, as if acting against us, first of all, looking to James the bishop, addressed him in this manner. If I, Gamaliel, deem it no reproach either to my learning or to my old age to learn something from babes and unlearned ones, If haply there be anything which it is for profit or for safety to acquire, for he who lives reasonably knows that nothing is more precious than the soul. Ought not this to be the object of love and desire to all, to learn what they do not know, and to teach what they have learned? For it is most certain that neither friendship, nor kindred, nor lofty power ought to be more precious to men than truth. Therefore, you, O brethren, if ye know anything more, shrink not from laying it before the people of God who are present, and also before your brethren, while the whole people shall willingly and in perfect quietness hear what you say. For why should not the people do this when they see even me equally with themselves willing to learn from you, if haply God has revealed something further to you? But if in anything you are deficient, be not ye ashamed in like manner to be taught by us, that God may fill up whatever is wanting on either side. But if any fear now agitates you on account of some of our people whose minds are prejudiced against you, and if through fear of their violence you dare not openly speak your sentiments, in order that I may deliver you from this fear, I openly swear to you by Almighty Yahweh, who liveth forever, that I will suffer no one to lay hands upon you. Since then you have all this people witnesses of my oath, and you hold the covenant of our sacrament as a fitting pledge, let each one of you, without hesitation, declare what he has learned, and let us, brethren, listen eagerly in silence. These sayings of Gamaliel did not much please Caiaphas, and holding him in suspicion, as it seemed he began to insinuate himself cunningly into the discussions. For smiling at what Gamaliel had said, the chief of the priests asked James, the chief of bishops, that the discourse concerning Christ should not be drawn but from the Scriptures, that we may know, said he, whether Jesus be the very Christ or no. Then said James, we must first inquire from what Scriptures we are especially to derive our discussion. Then he, with difficulty, at length overcome by reason, answered that it must be derived from the law, the Torah, and afterwards he made mention also of the prophets. To him our James began to show that whatsoever things the prophets say they have taken from the law, the Torah, and what they have spoken is in accordance with the Torah. He also made some statements respecting the books of the kings, in what way and when and by whom they were written, and how they ought to be used. And when he had discussed most fully concerning the Torah, and had by a most clear exposition brought into light whatever things are in it concerning Christ, he showed by most abundant proofs that Jesus is the Christ, and that in him are fulfilled all the prophecies which related to his humble advent. For he showed that two advents of him are foretold, one in humiliation, which he has accomplished, the other in glory, which is hoped for to be accomplished, when he shall come to give the kingdom to those who believe in him, and who observe all things which he has commanded. And when he had plainly taught the people concerning these things, he added this also, that unless a man be baptized in water in the name of the threefold blessedness, as the true prophet taught, he can neither receive remission of sins nor enter into the kingdom of heaven. And he declared that this is the prescription of the unbegotten God. To which he added this also: do not think that we speak of two unbegotten gods, or that one is divided into two, or that the same is made male and female, but we speak of the only begotten Son of God, not sprung from another source, but ineffably self originated, and in like manner we speak of the Paraclete. But when he had spoken some things also concerning baptism, through 7 successive days he persuaded all the people and the high priest that they should hasten straightway to receive baptism. And when matters were at the point that they should come and be baptized, some one of our enemies, entering the temple with a few men, began to cry out and to say, what mean ye, O men of Israel? Why are you so easily hurried on? Why are ye led headlong by most miserable men who were deceived by Simon, a magician? While he was thus speaking and adding more to the same effect, and while James the bishop was refuting him, he began to excite the people and to raise a tumult, so that the people might not be able to hear what was said. Therefore, he began to drive all into confusion with shouting, and to undo what had been arranged with much labor, and at the same time to reproach the priests, and to enrage them with revilings and abuse, and like a madman to excite everyone to murder, saying, "What do ye? Why do ye hesitate, O sluggish and inert? Why do you not lay hands on them and pull these fellows to pieces?" When he had said this, he first, seizing a strong brand from the altar, set the example of smiting. Then others also, seeing him, were carried away with like readiness. Then ensued a tumult on either side of the beating and the beaten. Much blood is shed. There is a confused flight, in the midst of which that enemy attacked James and threw him headlong from the top of the steps. And supposing him to be dead, he cared not to inflict further violence upon him. But our friends lifted him up, for they were both more numerous and more powerful than the others. But from the fear of God, they rather suffered themselves to be killed by an inferior force than they would kill others. But when the evening came, the priests shut up the temple, and we returned to the house of James and spent the night there in prayer. Then, before daylight, we went down to Jericho to the number of 5,000 men. Then, after 3 days, one of the brethren came to us from Gamaliel, whom we mentioned before, bringing to us secret tidings that the enemy had received a commission from Caiaphas, the chief priest, that he should arrest all who believed in Jesus, and should go to Damascus with his letters, and that there also, employing the help of the unbelievers, he should make havoc among the faithful, and that he was hastening to Damascus chiefly on this account, because he believed that Peter had fled thither. And about 30 days thereafter, he stopped on his way while passing through Jericho, going to Damascus. At that time we were absent, having gone out to the sepulchres of two brethren, which were whitened of themselves every year, by which miracle the fury of many against us was restrained, because they saw that our brethren were had in remembrance before God. While therefore we abode in Jericho and gave ourselves to prayer and fasting, James the bishop sent for me, and sent me here to Caesarea, saying, Zacchaeus had written to him from Caesarea that one Simon, a Samaritan magician, was subverting many of our people, asserting that he was the standing one, that is, in other words, the Christ, and the great power of the high God, which is superior to the Creator of the world, at the same time that he showed many miracles and made some doubt and others fall away to him. He informed me of all things that had been ascertained respecting this man from those who had formerly either been his associates or his disciples, and had afterwards been converted to Zacchaeus. Many, therefore, are, O Peter, said James, for whose safety's sake it behooves you to go and refute this magician, and to teach the word of truth. Therefore, make no delay, nor let it grieve you that you set out alone, knowing that Yahweh by Jesus will go with you and will help you, and that soon, by his grace, you will have many associates and sympathizers. Now, be sure that you send me in writing every year an account of your sayings and doings, and especially at the end of every 7 years. With these expressions, he dismissed me, and in 6 days I arrived at Caesarea. When I entered the city, our most beloved brother Zacchaeus met me, and embracing me, brought me to this lodging, in which he himself stayed, inquiring of me concerning each of the brethren, especially concerning our honorable brother James. And when I told him that he was still lame on one foot, on his immediately asking the cause of this, I related to him all that I have now detailed to you, how he had been called by the priests and Caiaphas the high priest to the temple, and how James the archbishop, standing on the top of the steps, had for 7 successive days showed the whole people from the scriptures of the Lord that Jesus is the Christ, and how, when all were acquiescing that they should be baptized by him in the name of Jesus, an enemy did all those things which I had already mentioned, and which I need not repeat. When Zacchaeus heard these things, he told me in return of the doings of Simon. And in the meantime, Simon himself, how he heard of my arrival, I do not know, sent a message to me saying, Let us dispute tomorrow in the hearing of the people. To which I answered, Be it so, as it pleaseth you. And this promise of mine was known over the whole city, so that even you, who arrived on that very day, learned that I was to hold a discussion with Simon on the following day. and having found out my abode, according to the directions which you had received from Barnabas, came to me. But I so rejoiced at your coming that my mind moved, I do not know how, hastened to expound all the things quickly to you, yet especially that which is the main point in our faith, concerning the true prophet, which alone, I doubt not, is a sufficient foundation for the whole of our doctrine. Then, in the next place, I unfolded to you the more secret meanings of the written law, through its several heads, which there was occasion to unfold, neither did I conceal from you the good things of the traditions. But what remains, beginning tomorrow, you shall hear from day to day in connection with the questions which will be raised in the discussion with Simon, until, by God's favor, we reach that city of Rome to which we believe that our journey is to be directed.